What if I told you that the quietest whisper in Middle-earth once shook the very bones of a forgotten fortress, and that in the heart of that silence, an ancient evil opened its eye once more? Imagine a forest so dark even the stars seem to avoid at a place where the wind holds its breath and the trees lean in. Not to shelter you, but to listen. What if the tales of Sauron's fall were not the end, but the beginning of something far? Worse, what if a single mad prisoner chained in shadow held the final clue to a secret that could unravel the world? In the dimming light beneath the ancient boughs of southern Mirkwood, a gray figure moved with silent purpose. The woods once known as Greenwood the Great had become twisted branches clawed at the sky, and even the birds dared not sing, riding swiftly beneath the darkened canopy was the wizard Gandalf, known to many by name, but understood by few. He came not with soldiers nor banners, but with a staff of ashwood, a sword at his side, and the fire of knowledge burning behind his eyes. For in the fortress of Dol Guldur, a place long whispered about in dread rumors had grown louder. The necromancer who ruled there might not be a phantom of shadow, but the great enemy himself, Sauron, the deeper Gandalf. Ventured the heavier the forest became, pressing down upon him like a fog of memory and malice. Every step brought him closer to a place where no light dared linger, the very air wryer of rot and fear. But he did not turn back. The whispers spoke of a prisoner held beneath the fortress, Thrain, son of Thor, once heir to the throne of Erebor, a king who had vanished with map and key in hand, searching for his people's lost homeland. If Thrain still lived, then the truth Gandalf sought was buried not just in stone, but in a shattered mind. Dol Guldur revealed itself at last like a wound carved into the hill, jagged and lifeless. Its towers clawed at the sky, wrapped in creeping mists that did not drift but slithered. No fires burned, no voices called, only silence, deep and screaming. Gandalf dismounted his horse brave as it was shuddered at the edge of the trees, and would go no further with a word of comfort. The wizard left it behind, knowing well he might return or vanish forever within the black. He moved along the outer wall, his fingers brushing the cold stone slick with dew and hate, with the magic of the Estari wrapping him in silence. Gandalf found a narrow crevice hidden beneath moss and rubble, just wide enough to crawl through. Inside was darkness absolute, a rotented corridor where time lost all meaning. Hours passed, or seconds, as he descended deeper toward the dungeons, toward the truth chains. Clinked to water, wept from the stones, shadows trembled on the edge of vision. One by one Gandalf passed the iron-bred cells, empty save for the memories they carried, till one whispered back, a shape stirred in the blackness broken. Bleeding and mad, the figure that huddled within was nearly unrecognizable, but the wizard knew Thrain, he whispered, and the dwarf's eyes opened. Pilgrim, the name came like a gasp. You have come. I have, Gandalf answered, and I must know who holds you here. What darkness rules this place? Thra trembled. He has it, the map, the key. He knows Erebor. The fire's scream erupted through the dungeons, inhuman and shrill. Gandalf rose, staff in hand. We are discovered. Thra clung to him one last time. Don't let him take at the mountain, the fire, and then he was still the eye. He has returned, Thra, son of Thor. Unrecorded words kept by Gandalf, and later revealed to the White Council. From the far end of the hall, a shape moved. Massive and formless, blacker than shadow, the presence that stirred was not merely. Felt it pressed upon Gandalf's spirit, like stone the veil of stealth dropped. Light blazed from his staff, silver, and searing the dungeon, groaned with power the enemy had awakened, the voice came. Not by ear, but through bone you trespass, gray wanderer, and Gandalf stood not as a traveler nor a guest, but as a guardian of flame. I seek only the truth, he said, and I have found it. There was silence, then laughter, cruel ancient grinding. Like ice upon steel you know me, well, yet you fear to speak the name I do not fear. You, Gandalf, declared you, our Sauron the word shattered the silence like thunder. The walls trembled to flame, in his staff flared brighter, you are late. The voice hissed, my plans are in motion, Erebor shall fall. Gandalf raised his staff again, and a shield of fire burst outward, breaking locks, cracking stone. And tearing a scream from the black, the fortress awoke like a nest of vipers. The truth had been unveiled, but the price was dear. Thra was dead, and now Gandalf fled, not in defeat, but in urgency. He returned to his horse, his robe torn, and minded a fire. The trees parted before him as he rode north. Behind him Dol Guldur loomed like a wound in the soul of Middle-earth, but he did not look back. It is worse than we feared, fun Gandalf upon leaving Dol Guldur unfinished. Tales Tolkien as the shadows of Mirkwood closed behind him. Gandalf bore with him not just the dead king's final breath, but a terrible certainty the enemy had returned, and war would follow in his wake. From the darkness of Dol Guldur he fled, bearing truth like a flame, truth that would ignite war across Middle-earth. For the eye had opened, and it saw not only the west, but the mountain and the ring. Gandalf rode northward beneath the thick canopy of Mirkwood, where the light struggled through the leaves like memories half buried in mist. The forest was no longer a place of song and starlight, but a cage of shadows. Even the creatures of the wood moved in silence, avoiding the narrow paths and muttering groves. The wizard pressed on his mind, burdened by Thra's final words and the overwhelming certainty of the evil he had encountered. The key and the map were now in the hands of Sauron, and worse still, the enemy knew of Erebor, and its strategic might. Darkness was moving not with the thunder of war, but with the patience of centuries. The deeper he went into the northern reaches of Mirkwood, the more the forest seemed to remember its former self. Light trickled through the high branches in pale shafts, and the air grew less heavy, carrying the scent of pine and moss rather than rot and decay. Here the influence of the woodland realm lingered, still protected by the vigilance of the elven king the great. Halls of Thranduil lay hidden beneath the forest hill, carved into the stone like roots into the earth, and it was to this place that Gandalf turned. He came as a friend, but his news carried the weight of fire and ruin. He was received with wary honor, for though Thranduil held him in regard, the matters of the wide world often seemed distant to the elven king, who had seen too many ages turn and too many promises fail in the quiet of the elven king's halls. Gandalf recounted all that had happened in Dol Guldur, the madness of Thrain, the confirmation of Sauron's return, and the peril now aimed at Erebor. Thranduil listened without interruption, his gaze fixed and unreadable. When the tale was done, along silence stretched between them, filled only by the soft echoes of torchlight and the murmur of wind through stone. Then the elven king spoke, his voice like snow over cold stone. He did not question the wizard's words, for he too had felt the unease in the forest and seen the fading of light in his own realm. But what troubled him most was the question of motive. Why Erebor? Why now? And Gandalf's reply came not as speculation, but as foresight. The lonely mountain was more than a kingdom lost. It was a keystone in the north. At its feet the rivers of commerce once flowed. Its halls held not only treasure, but the legacy of Duran's line of power that, if reawakened, could stand against the tide. Whoever held Erebor could influence the entire northern quadrant of Middle-earth, but more than that, beneath its roots slept a force older than many remembered. Smough, the last great fire drake of the north. If Sauron's will reach that far, and if he could bend the dragon to his cause, the devastation would be unimaginable. Gandalf knew this, and his purpose was clear. Erebor must not fall into shadow, nor Smaug be turned into a weapon of war. Thranduil, proud and cautious, offered no swift allegiance. Old wounds with the dwarves still burned, and the scars of long-forgotten feuds lingered, yet he did not forbid Gandalf's request for aid, nor deny the reality that the North stood on the edge of peril. Messages were sent, one to Lothlorien, another to Imladris, and the wizard, burdened yet relentless, turned his path westward toward Rivendell. There, among the wisdom of Eland and the counsel of the elder, the truth might find voice and unity be forged. The journey was long through dense forest and open plain, but Gandalf did not hesitate. He moved as one who knew time itself was a wall closing in. When at last he reached the hidden valley of Rindal, the air was crisper, touched with the scent of frost and starlight. Eland greeted him with the grace of old kinship, though his eyes clouded upon hearing the tale Gandalf bore. They sat beneath the vaulted halls, where the stars shone through carved arches, and Gandalf spared no detail. Thrain's death, the presence in Dol Guldur, and the darkening path that led toward Erebor. Eland, who had once stood with Gil-galad at the gates of Mordor, saw the truth behind the wizard's words. He remembered the weight of the ring, the fall of Elendil, and the weakness of men. He spoke little, but what he did say cut deep. Sauron had not been destroyed only, diminished, a shadow reduced, may still poison a kingdom. Eland, the White Council. Records, Rindal archives. The time had come to summon the White Council. Galadriel from the Golden Woods, Cian from the Havens, and Saruman the White, whose mind had turned to the lore of the One Ring. When they assembled in Rivendell's high halls, it was the first such gathering in many years. Each came with wisdom and doubt. Saruman, proud and veiled in reason, dismissed the danger. He argued that Sauron was a remnant. Dol Guldur, a puppet fortress. He warned against rash action and urged caution, cloaked in observation. But Gandalf stood firm, his voice neither raised nor wroth. You were not there, he said, and silence fell like snow upon steel. Galadriel, who had watched quietly, now spoke. Her voice was a whisper that stirred the soul, and her gaze reached far beyond the moment the darkness grows. I believe, Gandalf, if we wait, it will be too late. And so the council debated wisdom against fear, foresight against delay. In the end, no sword were drawn, no armies raised. The council agreed only to observe. To watch Dol Guldur would be watched, not attack. Saruman's counsel, though cloaked in caution, weighed heavily. he was the head of their order, and even among the wise. Appearances still held sway. Gandalf left Rivendell not in defeat, but with grim purpose. He would not wait for councils to move. He turned once more toward Erebor, not with force, but with fire. Intent to awaken the dwarves, stir the embers of a fallen kingdom, and raise a shield in the north, he journeyed far. Passing through the weathered hills and ruined kingdoms of the wild, seeking not kings, but those forgotten, he remembered. Thorin, son of Thrain proud, and bitter exiled among the blue mountains, warrior whose fire burned low, yet had not gone out to him. Gandalf would speak, not of armies, but of a quest. The wizard knew the task was not to wage war, but to set events in motion. Erebor must be reclaimed not for gold, but for strength. And Thorin must be more than a wandering heir. He must become a king once more, but pride alone would not defeat a dragon, for that they would need something else, something unexpected, and so Gandalf's thoughts turned to the Shire, to Bag, and to Bilbo Baggins, whose quiet life had once known only food and pipe smoke, but whose heart, the wizard believed, held something more, not strength of arms, but resilience of spirit, the kind that does not bend beneath shadow. True strength is not always found in the sword arm or the crown. Sometimes it stirs in the heart of one who has never known war. The Red Book of West marched thus. Gandalf set his plan. A company of dwarves led by Thorin, Oakenshield, a hobbit with a burglar's luck, and a two's curiosity, a map, a key, and the fire of Erebor waiting to be rekindled while the world slept. The first threads of a tale were being drawn together, not of war, not yet, but of a journey that would awaken more than gold. As Gandalf looked to the east, he knew what stirred in Dol Guldur had not gone to sleep again. The shadow had fled, but it was watching, and as he turned his thoughts to Bag, and he whispered to the wind a name, Bilbo. Gandalf returned to the west with thoughts darkened by urgency. The White Council had chosen delay, blinded by pride and politics, yet the wizard knew the moment for action had already arrived. The map and key taken from Thrawn now lay in the enemy's hand, and Sauron's had begun to twist events toward a grim design. Erebor, still guarded by fire and stone, was now a prize sought not only by its exiled heir, but by a power far older. The wizard moved quickly through the lands of men and hills of stone, seeking the only one who could turn the tide. Thorin, Oakenshield, not for his sword alone, but for the symbol he could become. For when a king calls, dwarves remember. Gandalf found Thorin in the Blue Mountains, among the scattered remnants of Duran's folk. Time had weighed on the prince's shoulders, and the years of exile had carved both pride and sorrow into his features. He bore the strength of his lineage and the fire in his heart had not faded, but he was hardened, burdened with the bitterness of loss. Gandalf approached with careful words, weaving into his speech the echo of purpose and possibility. He did not speak at first of the greater war or the shadows in the east. Instead, he spoke of home, of Erebor, and the right of a king to reclaim it. And Thorin listened, not with trust, but with a spark long buried beneath his stern demeanor. Something ancient stirred, yet Gandalf knew strength alone would not reclaim the mountains. Smough, the last of the great dragons, was a terror not to be met in open battle. To reclaim Erebor required cunning, not just courage. It would require someone overlooked, someone who could slip past fire and gold alike. That Thought had long taken root in Gandalf's mind-fragile, at first then firm hobbit. One of the quiet folk of the Shire, Bilbo Baggins, the idea seemed foolish on the surface, and Thorin, when told, responded with disbelief, but Gandalf insisted, not because Bilbo was a warrior, but precisely because he was not, the dragon would not see him coming, and that alone might make all the difference. Bilbo had not left the Shire for anything more dangerous than a picnic, yet Gandalf saw in him the blood of the Tucks, those rare hobbits with a touch of wildness in their hearts. He remembered a time when Bilbo had listened wide-eyed to stories of dragons and treasures, a flicker of curiosity hiding beneath his cautious nature. And now, with the world shifting and darkness rising, Gandalf believed the time had come to draw that part of him into the light. He returned to Bag End under skies calm and clear, though his heart was heavy with foreknowledge. The hobbit greeted him with confusion, with hospitality, and with doubt, but in time curiosity overcame comfort, and when the dwarves came knocking, Bilbo stood on the edge of a road that would lead far beyond the bounds of the Shire. The company was formed in secrecy, with names that would soon echo in halls long silent, Balin, Dwalin, Fili, Keely, and others, each bearing the burden of a house scattered by fire. Thorin led them, proud and unyielding, yet drawn forward by the hope that the mountain could be theirs again. Gandalf guided them only part of the way, for his path split from theirs. Before Mirkwood there were darker matters. He could not ignore whispers from the south and east that pulled him toward deeper dangers, yet he left them with a purpose planted and a journey underway. Erebor was no longer a dream. It was a destination, and one that would awaken powers long asleep, while Thorin's company crossed the misty mountains and braved the wilds. Gandalf moved through lands few dared treadward, had reached him through quiet means dark riders had stirred. In the east the Nine, the Nazgul long believed dormant, were on the move. They had crossed into forgotten lands. Their presence felt like a sickness in the earth. Gandalf's path led toward the ruins of Ravenian, toward the remnants of fallen watchtowers and empty fortresses where only shadows dwelt. In those broken places he found signs, symbols carved in stone, scorched earth, and the unmistakable scent of sorcery. The Nine were gathering, summoned by a will that no longer hid in half-truth. Sauron was calling them home. The Nazgul do not ride without command. When they stir, the hand of their master is never far. The scrolls of the North, Second Age fragment. Gandalf traveled in disguise, cloaked not only in gray robes, but in ancient enchantments. He spoke to wanderers in half-abandoned villages, heard tales of black shapes on the horizon, of stars vanishing at dusk, and whispers in tongues forgotten by time. The darkness had begun to move in earnest, no longer content with silence. Gandalf knew the truth. Sauron had survived not by power alone, but by patience, and now his patience was ending. He was no longer a shadow behind a name. The necromancer had worn a mask, but behind it stood the same will that had forged the One Ring, and that ring lost, yet ever whispering, had begun to call again. Lothlorien offered brief sanctuary. Galadriel, tall and terrible in beauty, received him beneath the golden trees where time did not touch the leaves. There he spoke of what he had seen and what he feared. The Nine were abroad. The dragon stirred and the ring, though still hidden, was not beyond Sauron's grasp. Galadriel listened her, gazed distant as if watching events not yet come to pass. When she spoke, her words were calm, but the sorrow in her voice ran deep. She knew, as did Gandalf, that the greatest war had not yet begun. Dol Guldur had been a symptom, not the disease. The ring still sleeps, but its dreams grow darker. Galadriel, Caris Galadon, records Gandalf left Lot Horin without rest, for news had reached him of Thorin's company. They had passed through goblin tunnels and spider-haunted woods. Bilbo, once a mere bystander, had begun to rise in quiet strength. The hobbit had changed, no longer a guest on the road, but a bearer of hope. Gandalf saw that though he had set events in motion, he could no longer guide every step. The quest would unfold without him. For a time, he returned to the borders of the wild, ever watchful. For now the dragon's slumber was broken. Erebor stood on the edge of fire and gold, and Sauron's eye had begun to turn north. The wind that swept down from the withered heath was sharp as steel and smelled faintly of smoke and old stone. Gandalf stood upon a barren ridge overlooking the scorched lands that stretched like a wound from the foot of Erebor, the lonely mountain, and his eyes narrowed as he studied the black peak. Veiled in a restless haze, from its summit rose a thin, undulating plume, subtle yet undeniable, and the mountain's breath, once silent, now stirred. The dragon had awakened, whether stirred by Thorin's arrival or drawn by a deeper, more ancient summons. Gandalf could not yet say, but he knew that the mountain's silence had ended, and with its voice the balance of the north would soon shatter. He had not approached the dwarves, nor revealed his presence, though he watched from afar. The company had moved with secrecy along the hidden paths, making camp within reach of the mountain's southern spur. From their furtive movements and the signs of excavation near the cliff face, Gandalf guessed they had located the secret entrance long spoken of in Duran's legends. He did not need to be close to know their purpose. Burned hot, the reclaiming of Erebor was no longer a plan. It was in motion, and its consequences would reach far beyond any of the dwarves' reckoning. But even as he observed, his thoughts remained fixed, not only on the dragon, but on a darker truth that haunted him like a silent echo. Far to the south, Sauron's strength was growing. The Nazgul had stirred again, no longer bound to their hidden tombs and secret halls. Whispers carried north by wind and wing told of dark riders crossing through the ruins of Rhûn and into the Westests beyond Mordor. The veil that had hidden their movement was thinning, and Gandalf had no doubt that was the will of the necromancer know of. Sauron himself, that had summoned them forth the Black Land, had not yet fully awakened, but its master had begun to cast his net again, reaching into lands once free and turning his eye toward places thought forgotten. Erebor, with its vast hoard and ancient strength, was one of those places. He descended from the ridge before dawn, taking the long road toward Lake Town, passing through the edges of a desolation where no bird sang, and even the wind carried a tone of warning. The air thickened with the scent of sulfur and ash, and the soil underfoot was cracked, scarred by old fires. The closer he came to the lawn lake, the more the signs of unease multiplied. Smoke rose not only from the mountain, but from hearths drawn colder by fear. The people of Esgaroth hardy, as they had begun to feel the pulse of dread. Gandalf passed through their town, quickly speaking only to the elders who remembered his face and the name. he warned them to be vigilant and prepare, for should the dragon rise in wrath, Lake Town would bear the first blow. He did not speak of gold or vengeance, he spoke of fire, and the danger of ancient things awakened in a world no longer prepared to face them. The town had prospered in modest peace for generations, but peace is the thinnest armor when flame falls from the sky. Gandalf saw it in their eyes, recognition, fear, and something harder too. Stir belief. They did not scoff at him. The tremble of the mountain was enough. He left them before the sun touched the lake, taking the eastern road through twisted woodland and frostbitten glades. The trees whispered warnings in languages older than men, and Gandalf, listen, the time had come. He reached a high hill west of the secret entrance and watched the mountain more closely. In the hush of dusk, a cry echoed faintly. From the cliffs, a sound not of battle, but of terror. Then came a roar vast and inhuman, not of throat or breath, but of fire. It rippled through the stone and into the marrow of the world. Smough, the ancient worm of the north, had awakened. His fury echoed through the valleys, and the sky lit with fire from afar. Gandalf watched as the mountain itself seemed to tremble. Birds fled, the ground shook, and in the valley below, watchmen lit their torches in trembling hands. He turned from the mountain, not in fear, but in grim certainty. The moment he had feared and planned for had come. The dwarves had awakened the dragon, and now the world would burn or change. He rode south again, swift and tireless, knowing that fire would follow in his wake. He sent word to Thranduil, the elven king, urging him to prepare not for alliance, but for survival. The gold beneath the mountain would draw more than greed, it would draw blood. Already the dragon's voice echoed across the north, and Gandalf feared it would soon awaken not only the armies of men and dwarves, but the wrath of Sauron himself. Even a slumbering flame can awaken a storm, and dragons once stirred do not burn alone. Sun Gray Annals is Starry Records, volume the third. Thandil received the news in his halls of carved stone and silver torch light beneath the forest where the stars still dared to shine. The elven king, though slow to rouse to war, understood the danger. He remembered the days when the forest was green and the mountain silent, but he also remembered the long hatred between dwarves and elves. He did not promise aid, but sent scouts to the borderlands and began to muster his warriors. Gold alone would not move him, but the fire of Smough aimed at his people would be met with steel. Still Gandalf left that realm with unease, for mistrust among the free peoples had long been Sauron's quietest ally. He turned then westward, crossing the wilds to Rivendell, where Eland awaited him. There he spoke again of all he had seen: the awakening of Smaug, the rising of the Nine, the movement in Mordor. He told of Thorin's presence near Erebor and the peril that now towered over the north. Eland, grave and calm, listened with deepening concern. He had watched many ages pass and seen peace fall like leaves in autumn. He did not question Gandalf's warnings. Instead, he asked the question the wizard had long feared: what of the ring? For Gandalf had not forgotten Thrain's final words, nor the truth he had uncovered in Dol Guldur. Among the Dwarf King's possessions had once been one of the seven, the rings given to the lords of the dwarves. That ring had vanished, taken in the dungeons of the necromancer. If Sauron had reclaimed it, then his power would already be growing worse. Still, it hinted at a deeper search bent not only on dominion, but on recovery, the one ring long thought lost in the river might still be calling, and if Sauron turned his gaze fully upon it, all their labors would be undone. He hunts now not only for thrones or lands, but for the thing that once bound them all. Elrond to the Council Scrolls, Rivendell archives. From Rivendell, Gandalf journeyed again to Lorien, where Galadriel awaited him beneath the golden canopy of Cas Galadin. There, amid ancient song and unspoken sorrow, they spoke of the dragon's flight and the enemy's reach Galadriel had seen. The shadow lengthened, not in miles, but in moments of silence and dread. She had felt the shift in the world's breath, and in her heart she knew that what lay ahead was no longer a contest of kingdoms. It was the beginning of an age's end. As they stood by the fountain of the heart of the wood, she turned her gaze westward and spoke the name he had not voiced since Bagin Bilbo. He bears more than he knows. Gandalf, weary from long road and troubled vision, did not answer. But he knew the truth of her words. Somewhere beneath the roots of Erebor, in the hands of a hobbit who had never asked for greatness, a thread of fate had already begun to tighten, and beyond the mountain far in the east a shadow had begun to smile in the southernmost reaches of Mirkwood, where the shadows clung to the trees like rot, and the air grew sick with decay. The hill of Amon Lank rose once more as a blight upon the land. Dol Guldur, the fortress of sorcery, had long festered at its summit like a wound in the flesh of the world. What once had been fair and green was now cloaked in foulness, and no light touched its towers. The birds no longer flew near, and even the spiders of the forest crept away from its poisoned breath. Beneath its stones, ancient evil stirred, servants of a master who had long abandoned names, but not dominion. And now at last the time had come to cast down the veil and strike. They came not in great numbers, nor with banners raised. No fanfare heralded their arrival. The wise had gathered in silence, and resolve from the west rode Galadriel, cloaked in starlight, and bearing a power older than memory. Her presence silenced the air itself. Elend followed from Imladris, his steps measured, eyes set with ancient foresight. Saruman the white arrived last, robes bright as fresh snow, though his gaze betrayed the weight of pride that sat behind the calm. And Gandalf, gray as ash and fire, led them onward. Their strength was not in armies, but in the wills that stood unshaken through ages of darkness. Together they passed through the forest like a silent storm, unseen save by those whose hearts trembled at their passing. When they reached the base of Doldur, the land shuddered beneath their feet. The gates, sealed by spells of dread and ancient cruelty, loomed high above them. There was no challenge shouted, no warning given. Saruman stepped forward and spoke words not heard since the elder days, language older than the trees. The iron doors groaned as if in agony, and burst inward with the sound of thunder. Split from the bones of the earth from within, spilled a gust of black wind, reeking of despair, foul with the memory of screams and chains. But the light of Galadriel surged forward, silver and clear, driving back the dark like fire through cobwebs into the fortress. They descended, bearing the fire of the west. The halls of Dol Guldur were as they had long been cursed. The stone wept, the Walls whispered shadows coiled along the ceilings like smoke. Without flame, there were cries in the deep low and high. Voices of those too broken to die, or too old to remember silence. Orcs clad in dark iron rushed to meet the intruders. But they faltered in the light. Wraiths screamed, retreating into mists unnamed. Things hissed from cracks in the earth, but none could withstand the wrath of the wise Elrond struck with light. And when Saruman's voice shattered stone, and bone alike Galadriel moved like flame. Through mist untouched, unyielding, and Gandalf, though his fire was not as bright, fought with the fury of truth, and memory casting down shadow. With every blow at last they reached the central chamber deep beneath the foundations of the fortress, where the very stones seemed to beat with a dark pulse. It was here that the necromancer had once stood, here that Gandalf had faced the will behind the veil, but now the chamber was empty. The master had fled. The signs of his departure were scattered burned scrolls, broken relics, and spells half-written in black ink. The throne of smoke and fear was abandoned, yet there could be no doubt as to who had sat upon it. The walls were marked with sigils of the Irus of command and conquest stained the floor. The nine had been summoned from their graves, and in the ruined altar at the center of the room maps lay. Scattered maps that showed not only the lands of the north, but the rivers of the Anduin, the misty mountains, and most damning of all the Gladen fields. He has fled, said Elend, but he has left behind his intentions the white council minutes of the assault on Dol Guldur, preserved in Rivendell. They found more than maps in a vault sealed with curses and blood. They uncovered fragments of dark enchantments, spells designed not to enslave, but to search. They were ancient, insidious incantations meant to call out, to find something long lost. And there among the symbols one was etched over, and over a single circle broken by flame, the one ring, the realization settled. Over them like the fall of snow upon a battlefield. Sauron had not merely sought dominion, he sought to reclaim his power. Entire, the necromancer had never been a servant. He had always been the master in disguise. In that moment, the purpose of Dol Guldur became clear. It had been a testing ground, a crucible in which to gather power, to prepare the nine, and to seek the ring. But now with the council strike, the veil had been torn. The enemy had been forced into the open, though the fortress was broken and its dungeons emptied. The war had only begun. Sauron had withdrawn not in defeat, but by design. His mask had fallen, and he would rise again in the land of his birth behind the black walls of Barad-dûr. But the wise had dealt a blow to his secrecy. That at least was a victory. Galadriel spoke last in that chamber, raising her hand. She chanted a prayer of cleansing, and light poured from her like moonlight caught in water. The darkness fled. The curses that stained the walls cracked and fell away like old bark. The fortress did not fall, it remained broken and hollow, but its power was undone. The taint upon Mirkwood began to retreat. Slowly like a tide drawn back by the moon, the wise left Dol Guldur behind, knowing that though the battle had ended, the war now loomed more clearly than ever before. He is revealed, said Galadriel, and now we must reveal ourselves. In kind the shadow grows, but so too must the flame. The journals of Karaz Galadon entry on the cleansing of Doldur. They returned to their realms, each bearing different burdens. Elend began preparing Rivendell for what he knew must come Galadriel, turned her. Thoughts westward, watching the woods and the roads beyond, but Saruman though he had fought with might and brilliance, withdrew into silence. He spoke often of strength, of the need to fortify Enard. Of gathering knowledge, he dismissed further talk of the ring, insisting that it was lost forever beyond all hope. Or Peril Gandalf did not believe him. He had seen too much in the ruins, felt the echo of Sauron's will, and the clarity of Thrin's last words still rang in his mind. A One Ring had not perished, its voice was not yet silent, and now that Doldur had fallen, Sauron would seek it more openly. He would turn his gaze upon the lands of men and the hills where hobbits dwelled, though the Shire lay far from the eye of the storm Gandalf's. Thoughts turned again to Bilbo, for though the hobbit was no warrior, he had crossed into darkness and returned, and Gandalf, who had chosen him with little more than a hunch, now began to suspect that Bilbo carried more than courage in his pocket. The days that followed the cleansing of Dol Guldur were quiet, but the silence was strained, filled with the weight of what had been revealed and the knowledge of what would come, though the fortress now stood empty and its spells unraveled. The evil that had dwelled there had not perished, it had only retreated like smoke curling back into the coals. Waiting for the wind to turn again, Sauron, driven from his hiding place, had fled eastward to the land that had once been his seat of power in the dark plains behind the mountains of shadow. The ancient foundations of Barad began to stir. The stones long buried now rose again, guided not by hand, but by will, a force that needed no hammer, no chisel, only the hunger of dominion. Even as the wise turned their attention back to their lands, Gandalf's path led him once more to the north. His heart was troubled, not only by the enemy's retreat, but by the choices that still lay before them. All he had seen the fire in Erebor. Awakened, he had felt the breath of the dragon move across the wind. Now he feared that the power of Smaug might yet be twisted into the service of darkness, for while dragons were creatures of ruin, they were not without thought, and Sauron's whispers could carry far if the beasts were not stopped. If he rose in alliance with the shadow that stirred anew in Mordor, then all of northern Middle-earth would fall in flame before the first trumpet of war could even sound. Gandalf traveled quickly, passing again through the wilderness of Rovanian, where wolves roamed the edges of ruined villages and men whispered of strange sightings in the skies and the wildlands beyond the long lake. He spoke to those who had neither crown nor city rangers, wanderers, hill folk from them. He gathered tidings that few others would have noticed. The signs were small broken stones in forgotten burrows, dark birds flying in formation where none should be, and silence in woods where once the animals had cried freely. It was enough. He knew the time had grown short. Erebor had been reached. The dwarves had entered, and Smaug had awakened. He did not approach the mountain directly. The lands around it were now watched by more than men. The dragon, disturbed from his long slumber, had grown restless. Smoke trailed from the mountain's crown by day, and at night the fire of his breath flickered within the clouds, casting a red hue that made the stars seem dim. Gandalf climbed a high ridge on the western side, concealed by darkness and wind, and from there he saw the ruin begin. Smaug had taken flight. His wings, vast and terrible, beat the air like thunder beneath him. The land trembled. The dragon's sword south drawn not merely by the scent of dwarves, but by rage, and perhaps something else, something older, deeper. Beckoning from the shadow, Gandalf watched the sky burn and turned swiftly toward Lake Town he knew the town lay in. The path of fire, its wooden beams no match for the fury that now flew toward them, he arrived too late to warn them. Though not too late to see the aftermath, the city had been set alight, its wooden structures reduced to cinders. Its people scattered in terror, and yet among the ruin there was a cry of defiance. Bard, a descendant of the line of Girion, had stood atop the towers with a black arrow drawn, and his aim true Smaug had. Fallen pierced through the heart, and the dragon's corpse now lay shattered upon the ruins he had made the mountain. Though still crowned in smoke, was unguarded, the fire is spent, but the embers burn hotter for the gold now laid. Bear chronicles of the lake account of Bard's defense in the absence of the dragon. The treasure hoarded in Erebor glistened again in the eyes of the world. Word spread quickly, the dwarves had awakened the gold of their fathers, and with Smaug on the vaults stood open. Filled with wealth untold from the forest, marched Thranduil seeking redress and caution from the lake. Rose Bard, no longer just a bowman, but a leader of his people, and from the Iron Hills came Denny, kinsman of Thorin, bringing with him warriors of the old halls. Thorin, now seated within the mountain, saw all who came as threat not. Ally he would yield, no coin, no crown, the treasure was his birthright, and he would defend it with all the pride of Duran's line. Gandalf arrived as the armies stood ready at the gates. He did not wear armor, nor carry banners, but his presence alone was a force. He tried to reason with Thorin to remind him of the true enemy, who now moved in the south, but Thorin, blinded by the lust of gold and the weight of old grievances, would not listen. The mountain was his, and he would not share it, not with men, not with elves, not even with kin. The battle that followed, known ever after as the Battle of the Five Armies, was born not of hatred, but of fear and pride. Yet in its chaos a strange unity was forged. Dwarves fought beside men, elves beside both, and when the goblins came crawling from the mountain's roots, all stood together. Pride kindled the fire, but in its flames old enemies found common cause. The songs of Erebor, third age chronicle. Thorin fell beneath the shadow of the mountain, his heart broken not by blade, but by the weight of his own choices with his death. The fury in the gold seemed to fade, as if the treasure itself had waited for its master to release it. Yen took the throne and ruled with wisdom, granting peace to those who sought it. But Gandalf, though he stood among the living, did not linger in the halls. He had seen what he came to see. The dragon was gone. The gold was secured. The alliance, however fragile, had been forged, yet the shadow still stirred in the east. He turned his path once more toward the south, for word had reached him from Lothlorien. The Nine had been seen again. Riders cloaked in black had passed into the borders of Rhûn, and from Mordor itself smoke now rose by day and fire by night. Sauron had returned not as a ghost, but as a force, rebuilt the lands beyond the mountains of shadow. No longer lay empty the fortress of Barad-dûr, once shattered now rose a new stone upon stone, shaped by sorcery and fueled by will the eye. Once hidden, now opened, Gandalf rode swiftly, the knowledge of the ring never far from his thoughts. He had suspected for some time, but now the weight of truth pressed hard. Bilbo Baggins, the hobbit he had once chosen for courage, had returned from Erebor with more than treasure. There was something in his pocket A. Trinket he guarded closely, one he had spoken of only in whispers. Gandalf did not yet name it aloud, but in his heart he knew the ring of power had been found, and the war for Middle-earth had only just begun.